where did you come from in the UK originally?
Yeah, so I was born and grew up close to Birmingham in the West Midlands in the UK, and yeah, lived there until I left school when I was 18. Studied in Southampton on the south coast of the UK, and then the early part of my professional career was in southern England, and then later in the Coventry area of the UK, so not that far away from where I grew up. And from there, I ended up being an expat in Germany for a significant part of my professional career after that. Moved out there in 2006 and left at the end of 2018, which kind of coincided actually with the decision to go self-employed, and a lot of the push factors behind that in terms of why I left was Germany is just not a particularly business friendly place if you're a one person business, if you're a solopreneur, you know, if you're a medium sized Western Europe. So in that sense, it's worked out pretty well, really.
Sure, that's cool. Were you always planning on being an expat, or was that a move to Germany based on your company moving you, or how did that come about?
Yeah, it certainly wasn't because the company moved me. No, I moved to start a new position out there.
Okay.
I spent a year in Germany as part of my studies. I studied German language as part of my degree. So that certainly helped in that sort of I knew what I was expecting, and that, you know, I'd done a sandwich year in Germany, working as an intern for a German company as part of my degree. So
sure.
The language was familiar. Some aspects of the business culture were familiar, but being there as an intern versus going back there as a manager is a lot different. You know, having the life that you're having essentially as a work placement student versus as a professional is quite different. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're there for over 10 years then, and was that an enjoyable experience? I mean, I might be totally wrong, but I've always found Germans not difficult, but maybe dry is the word I'm looking for. So how is it living there for that amount of time as a Brit, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate in the sense that all of the companies that I worked for, I did 3 different jobs while I was out in Germany. Had 3 different employers while I was in Germany, and they were all international companies. 2 of them were American companies. 1 of them was a Swedish company. So I've not had to grapple with, you know, some of the more inflexible or stubborn aspects of working for, you know, the stereotypical mid-sized German company that is maybe quite rigid in the way that it operates. And I think there's definitely some truth to that stereotype in that regard. In terms of life as an expat in Germany is great. But certainly, you know, as an employee, you know, you're very well protected as an employee. Salaries are good, quality of life is good. You know, it has relatively few issues with crime and social problems, although that is sadly, you know, starting to change now, certainly over the past 5 or so years. But you know, Germany offers a great quality of life for expats and for international employees. The winter's a little bit grim. That's probably the toughest part, and there isn't that much variety in terms of the food, although if you're in bigger cities there are a lot of international restaurants, but yeah, if you're in a smaller town, you know, the cuisine and the bar and restaurant scene can be a little bit staid. But other than that, no, life in Germany is great. I mean, I don't have family, I don't have kids, but certainly for families, Germany is a very, very popular expat destination. And I think I went there in 2006, and I actually had the chance in 2013 to move to Switzerland when I changed jobs. And part of me says maybe I should have done, because it was at that time where I was kind of getting itchy feet and thought, you know, maybe it's time to consider something else, because I'd sort of done and seen and experienced most of the things that I wanted and to get out of being an expat. Because I'd bought an apartment at a pretty low price and had everything there, I think that's probably what kept me there longer than I probably otherwise would have been. but yeah, certainly the first few years of life, that was great. You know, it was all a new experience, and yeah, certain aspects of the lifestyle, especially in summer with all of the festivals that they have, and with certainly the weather being a lot nicer than it is in the UK in the summer.
Do they actually get a much better summer than us? I always assume they're sort of would be there or thereabouts. Similar.
They do, yeah. It's certainly, the weather's certainly a lot less changeable there. You know, you can, if you're planning a barbecue on a summer weekend, you're going to be pretty unlucky if you get a weekend of rain. Whereas in the UK, if you're planning a wedding or a barbecue or something, it's a potluck, isn't it? It's 50-50 exactly. Almost. So yeah. The summers are definitely warmer and sunnier, and the winters are colder. They don't get that much snow, but certainly the temperatures are lower than they are in the UK during winter.
Nice, so proper seasons then. And then so 2018 you decided to move from there. Why Bulgaria? That seems quite a random place in most people's books.
Yeah, it was, and it wasn't really that planned at the time. I would kind of provision to move back to the UK because at the point that I was in the process of sort of quitting my job to set up myself with my own business, my mom passed away, and my dad wasn't in the best of health at that time either. So I kind of planned to move back to the UK, albeit I saw it as being more temporary rather than permanent. But I thought maybe for the next 2 or 3 years, I may need to base myself out of the UK. Sure. To cut a long story short, really, I took a month off when I quit my job. Went traveling for 5 weeks in Argentina. I met a girl there while I was out there, and thought that may have had some longevity. So I kind of put my decisions to move back to the UK on hold at the time. Sure. I have a holiday home in Spain, so I spent a few months there at the beginning of 2019, just because I had it as a base that I didn't have to pay rent, and had some stuff there. So I sort of based myself there until I figured out whether there would be any potential with this lady that I'd met in Buenos Aires, and when that turned out to not be, you know, the long-term proposition that I thought it may have been, that sort of turned my eyes to say, well, okay, I don't really want to base myself in Spain in terms of running a business from here, albeit, you know, it's a lovely place to spend a couple of months or to go on holiday. So that really focused me. I'm thinking, okay, well, where do I want to set this up? So in the summer of 2019, in the August and the September, I'd done a bit of research, and I knew that Southeast Europe was pretty favorable in terms of both living costs and corporate and personal taxation. So I did a bit of a recce and spent some time in Romania and Bulgaria, and decided on Sofia really because I wanted to be in a bigger city. At the time, pre-COVID, I thought that I may have to sort of fly in and out to clients every couple of weeks. And I just didn't really like Bucharest as a city. So even though I loved some of the smaller cities in Romania, I thought that I needed to be in the capital in terms of access to a decent sized airport, which is ultimately what led me to choosing Bulgaria and locating in Sofia.
Sure. Interesting. I've never actually been to Bulgaria, but it's sort of one of those places which I think is, and Romania, I suppose, as well, is becoming more and more attractive to a lot of people. Seems like it's potentially less bureaucratic in many ways, a bit more no nonsense about, well, everything really. So I don't know if that's the case, or how your experience there has been.
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. Some things are and some things aren't. It's certainly a lot more free in terms of what we've seen with COVID restrictions, and you know how heavy the long arm of government has been. You know, it's been very, very chill in Bulgaria, and from what I hear, it has been in most of the Balkan countries as well. So that's certainly been a very positive aspect, that, you know, other than the first lockdown and for a period last winter from just before Christmas to sort of middle of March, where bars and restaurants were closed, life has been pretty free and pretty normal here. Yeah. Bureaucracy, I mean, there is a lot of bureaucracy around things that are still quite similar to how things worked under the communist regime in some of the more administrative processes and the way that government departments work. But there's a lot less regulation here in terms of running a business. Right. It's just a less mature market in a lot of ways, with the pros and cons that brings. I personally see it as a positive. Yeah. Others that are maybe a bit more sort of statist or big government in their view of the world would probably hate it. But yeah. But yeah, I really like it. And it is growing. Certainly Bulgaria is becoming a huge hub for software and IT, and that, you know, other than tourism and some of the agriculture, it's got quite a big wine industry and, you know, rose oil and some other products, but IT is a huge industry here, and it's something that the government is really trying to promote as well. Romania, on the other hand, is more developed as a manufacturing base and sort of tends to look more towards that, although, I mean, it does have startups in an IT sector. But interestingly, Bulgaria has less than half of the population of Romania, but there's a lot more VC investment and VC funds investing in startups in Sofia than there are in Bucharest and in Cluj.
Interesting. What's the English like over there? Do you have a problem at all with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly not as good as it is in the Netherlands or in Scandinavia, but it's a lot better than if you go to France or Italy. So I'd say it's somewhere in between. Certainly, educated people under sort of 40-ish all speak English. Yeah. To a varying extent. If you go into the post office or if you go into a restaurant, it's hit and miss.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think that a lot of them are probably went to university in the UK. I certainly remember I used to run a bar in London, and pretty much everyone I employed was Bulgarian, actually, and they were all students, you know. So, and most of them were studying IT or some sort of tech-related field. So that sort of makes sense.
How life's changed since like 2002, when every barman in London was a South African or a Kiwi.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, I think now it's probably going to change again based on, you know, how people can move. You know, I think that's obviously changed. So it'll be interesting to see what the next wave comes from. But yeah, has that affected your existence there at all? Obviously, now that we're not in the European Union, we don't have can't just go willy-nilly, or is that not really an issue?
I actually have dual nationality, but I did make the move. I did make the move just in time. If I had have needed to do it as a British citizen, I did just about make the move in time. But no, I do actually have an EU citizenship. So in that regard, I'm very, very fortunate. It was certainly makes life easier.
Yeah, definitely. Interesting. And you think that you're going to stay there for a while? Is that like a long-term spot?
I mean, certainly for the foreseeable future. I mean, I do see myself as a bit of a digital nomad, in the sense that I don't have to be here, but I certainly don't plan to uproot my company and my sort of business structure, because it's just difficult to extract yourself from one system to another. It's much easier in terms of as an individual rather than a business. I do see myself spending sort of 8 or 9 months a year here, and then spending my winters somewhere in the tropics or in the southern hemisphere, because I don't like cold weather. I don't like the grey and the dark more than anything. I can deal with the snow. I just don't like the grey and the dark.
I think that's a common theme with Brits abroad, really. I think we're all trying to escape the gloom. Yeah. So no, that's totally
and the winter here is pretty bleak, and it's you get more sunny days than you do in the UK, but it gets cold and it snows a lot.
Yeah, they have good skiing though, I heard. Or is that?
They do. Yeah, I spent last winter actually in Bansko, knowing that it would be difficult to travel and with restrictions changing all the time. But I tore my knee ligaments at the end of February, so I don't think I'll be skiing this winter, just to be on the safe side.
Fair enough. Maybe Dubai is not a bad option for a part of the year, but if you're looking for a sort of tax efficient.
Yeah, I've never been there. You know, you guys are based in Dubai, right? I mean, I've never been there. I've changed planes there, but it's somewhere that never really appealed to me in terms of living there. You know, the perception is that it's just this big shopping mall in the desert. But it is a big international hub, and like you say, it's very tax friendly, and it's easy to do business there, and it's growing, isn't it? It's so international and so multicultural that I think it's a real beacon to show that how, you know, multiculturalism can succeed when you're not bringing people in that are just going to be dependent on a welfare system, because everyone that comes into Dubai, if you ain't got a job, you don't work there, right?
That's exactly it. It's yeah, it's a good system. I don't know how it would work with a larger population, but at the moment it's fine. There is a welfare system in place for passport holders, and it's quite a significant one, but
but not for expats or foreign nationals.
Exactly. No, so no, I'm all for it. It doesn't bother me. I mean, if you ask my dad, for example, would never live here because you can't vote, and that's like a fundamental thing that he believes in, but it works, so there you go.
What's it like about getting permanent residency there, though? Is that particularly hard, or I mean, if you lose your job, do you pretty much have to leave the country, or do you have a bit of leeway?
I mean, it's getting easier and easier, so they're sort of trying to attract people exactly like yourself, who are self-sufficient, and they have visa categories which allow you to pay a small amount, and that will give you a year or so, and you can come and set up your business. So people could come without a job if they had the funds to get that kind of visa and pay for it. I actually lived here for 3 years without a visa. I just left the country every 40 days. So it's a chore, but I was starting a business, and I didn't have the means to sponsor my own visa at that time, and so I just crossed the border with Oman and came back. So some people wouldn't want to do that. Obviously, that means you're uninsured, and there's various other things that you can't do. But it is possible. Where there's a will, there's a way. Basically, that's sort of where it is. The other option is through purchasing property of a certain value, and then you can stay indefinitely. But it's a love or hate place, that's for sure. Some people will hate it and do hate it, and some people love it. I never wanted to be here. No, it was just one of those things. So, but after some time, you learn to see the pros of staying in a place like this. So that's good. I have always had a thought towards Eastern Europe, just because it seems like you get that balance between nature and the outdoors. It's not too busy, and it's also not third world. It's sort of I assume there's still problems as a sort of hangover from the times past gone, but I assume they're sort of getting better and better. So I don't know if that's the thing, if it still has any sort of issues lingering in terms of the previous governments and stuff, but it looks like
the biggest challenge. I mean, I think the biggest challenge in Bulgaria, just looking at it from an expat side, pensions is obviously a big one. That if you're poor in Bulgaria, pensions are terrible. You get virtually nothing. Fine. But from an expat's perspective, the biggest challenge is probably the infrastructure. The internet is great. Internet's really fast. Road and rail infrastructure is pretty poor. And that's just a hangover, really, that they have a lot of structural problems with, really with a corruption at a very high level, and that affects construction projects and money that gets siphoned off from EU funds.
Right. Okay. So they're getting money from the EU and just pocketing it, basically. Is that a thing still?
Through handing out contracts to companies that are aligned or have special interests with the government. Yeah.
Interesting. Do you think that's something that they're working on changing, or is it the people who are responsible for that are sort of the people that would be responsible for the change and therefore feel no motivation to?
Yeah, I mean, it will change over time. I think inevitably it will be. And I think if Bulgaria does get the euro in 2024, which is what the plan is, then really? I think if it becomes part of the eurozone, then I think the Germans and the Dutch and the Austrians will be we'll be all over them like a rash in terms of monitoring that.
Would that impact your decision to stay there if it did change to a euro? Would that change anything for you?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, and I've thought about it a lot. I think it will make doing business easier in that it will force the banking system to modernize. But I think the fear is, the euro has not done Southern European countries many favors when you look at the other economies that have some similarities to Bulgaria. If you look at Greece or Italy or Spain, other than them getting nice new roads from the EU, that you don't look around there and see the benefits that the euro has brought them. My fear is that if Bulgaria gets the euro and we see massive inflation in prices, but we don't see the inflation in salaries and living standards, it could potentially be a big mistake. I don't want Bulgaria to get the euro. I don't think it's in their interests. I think if the Czechs and the Poles have been resisting taking the euro for years, and I think for good reason. The only silver lining that I can see is that if Bulgaria is able to structure itself to be a more tech-driven economy, and through having the single currency, that enables that to grow and flourish. But again, that's very much a Sofia-based economy, and the rest of the country, I don't know. On the one hand, the economy is more dynamic in that it doesn't have as big public spending as the Southern European economies. The unions are not as strong. It's easier to fire people, those types of things. But then on the other hand, the business culture and the work ethic is sadly quite Southern European. So I do think that is a danger. It would be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah. So if that happened, did you know where you would go after that?
No.
The world is your oyster, I suppose.
Maybe Georgia or Ukraine, I guess, if I wanted to stay local, or Serbia, perhaps. If I wanted to go somewhere completely different, maybe Latin America.
Interesting. And your business is it a global operation, as in you can work with companies anywhere in the world with that?
I could do in theory. Working with Americans is always challenging because they have this culture of litigation. So unless you're insured up to your eyeballs, it's a bit risky to work with American businesses. Sure. At the moment, my clients are Western European, in their entire, UK, EU, and Switzerland. So unless that changes, I'm through the podcast that I have, I want to try and grow that as a sort of second revenue stream, and that would make myself a lot more location independent in terms of clients. If I did that, it would make, I hate the word passive income, but it would sort of grow that stream more than being dependent on effectively selling my time for money doing consulting, which is something that I'm keen to do. Not in terms of being able to give me more location freedom, because I kind of already have that, other than time zone constraints. Sure. It's more around if we ever have something like a COVID again, where the world pretty much shuts down, then I've still got money coming in, and I don't have to worry about companies slashing their budget for external consultants.
No, that's fair. And coming on to your business, I guess. So you started it 2018, is that correct?
I started it at the beginning of 2019, but the first assignment I did was a gig for my former employer. So it wasn't really until just before COVID hit that I was really going after it, sort of hammer and nail, looking for new clients with whom I had no sort of personal or prior contact with. So yeah, it's just wrong place, wrong time, really, in terms of trying to grow that. I'm lucky that I had the runway in terms of savings, and that life is cheap here. Yeah.
And your business is procurement, and that's what you were doing before, but just as an employee rather than for yourself.
Yeah, and it is a little bit different, in terms of the mindset and the way that you work as an employee versus going in somewhere and doing a consulting assignment on a particular project or requirement for a few months at a time, where you kind of have to hit the ground running and sort of be more resourceful. But then at the same time, if that client has brought you in and is paying you a good day rate to do what you're good at doing, then it's a lot easier to have more senior stakeholders' ears, because they see you as being an external expert that they've brought in, rather than just someone in an in-house procurement team. So that's certainly been insightful. And I just like it because even though a lot of the day-to-day work is quite similar in many aspects, I don't have to do the whole corporate BS of personal development plans and office politics and the typical, where do you see yourself in 5 years time? Not here.
No, that's true. You don't have to. I mean, that's interesting actually, that your first gig was your last employer, so they must have been pretty either upset that you were leaving them, or like I think that's quite a good sign for somebody going alone, is that obviously that sort of validates your value, if you like, straight off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, I was very glad of having that as continuity and not having to worry about money for the first few months. But it was kind of a blessing and a curse in a way, because it was a blessing in that I knew the clients, I knew the business inside out, I knew the strengths and weaknesses and some of the issues that I would face. And I knew there would be flexibility around, working hours. They were cool with me logging on a bit later in the morning when I was in Buenos Aires for a month, for example. Sure. The flip side of that is it was essentially 9 months where I could have been going out farming and hunting, sure. that I didn't spend any resources on that. And when you're new to running your own business, having gone from it straight from being an employee, it does take you a while to figure out, to think with an entrepreneur's mindset rather than an employer's mindset. And in hindsight, probably it would have been good to have spent the money that I was earning on perhaps some lead generation activities on LinkedIn, because if I didn't have physically the time to do it myself, I think looking back, it probably would have been good to hire someone to help me a little bit with sales and business development, which was and still is probably my weak link in terms of it's the area that I feel the least comfortable doing. I enjoy doing the marketing part, but direct sales and outreach is, it's not something I've done in the past. I've always been on the other side of the table. And while certain aspects of negotiations and running business meetings and discovery calls are similar, it's just sort of on the flip side. Cold outreach is a skill that I can't really sort of apply my procurement mindset and just flip it. Whereas if you're on a call or in a negotiation, you can do. So that's probably been the toughest part. And having that gig from my former employer at the start kind of made me having to sort of get my feet wet doing that.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I think definitely cold outreach is quite a daunting task, and probably have to have a very thick skin as well. Be prepared for a lot of rejection. So it's not an easy thing to go at, I don't think. And probably you're right. I think that's where a lot of people struggle in things as well. So that makes total sense. I think in terms of procurement, you're going to have to excuse my ignorance on this, but I was looking on your website, and so if I get this right, you basically look at a business and where they're purchasing things for their supply chain, or whatever it may be, and save them costs on that. Is that how that works?
Yes. I mean, the easiest example I can use is every company knows what they sell, but not many companies truly understand what they spend their money on. And just like you wouldn't send an office assistant or an IT manager out to sell something to a potential new customer, they shouldn't be allowed anywhere near a supplier contract or a purchasing negotiation. But inevitably they do, because they, in my view, wrongly think that they know how to buy. And yes, they may know how to haggle to buy a secondhand car, or to do a Donald Trump style negotiation on a piece of real estate. But if we're talking about a long-term supplier relationship that has to be collaborative, buying pens is a lot different to buying IT or to buying warehousing or or buying capex. So I think that's the mistake that a lot of companies make. They think that because managers generally are quite skilled at negotiating, perhaps with unions or with employees, or maintaining business relationships, that they're experts at negotiating supply contracts. Well, just like you wouldn't send some random person out to sell to a customer, they shouldn't be buying stuff either.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense, and I completely get that. You know, we all buy stuff, so we probably all assume we're quite good at it. But I guess it's totally different things, isn't it? Is that the contracts that they'll get you in, you'll relook at the existing contracts, or they get you in at the very, very beginning when they're looking to buy something? What's that sort of process?
Yeah, it really, really varies. So some companies will reach out because they have a specific project that they just don't have the internal resources to manage. Okay. You know, if they need to buy a new piece of kit, or if they need to look at an area of spend that they know is out of control or not being managed properly, but they don't have the internal procurement resources on their team to get their arms around it. The end-to-end is typically, ideally, if it's something that's completely greenfield, I would go in at the start, and first of all, I would help them to understand what they're spending their money on, because a finance director or a controller can pull out a CSV file, and they will know which suppliers they've paid which invoices to. So they will know where their money is going against different budgets or against different cost centers. What they won't necessarily know is, are they getting good value for money from their suppliers? Sure. Which areas of spend do they potentially have risk with because they're single sourcing? Or where do they have opportunity for improvement because maybe, okay, they've got 25 different production locations and they've got 25 different office supplies vendors, which, you know, if you're buying pens and folders and office furniture, you can buy it from anyone. So why do you need 25? You just need one, and negotiate a corporate discount with them, implement the contracts, and boom, you've got probably, you know, in a multi-million-dollar business, you've got 100K savings there straight away. Similar with things like transportation. Sure. If you don't understand the Incoterms of what you're buying, and if you're dealing with hundreds of different freight vendors, that's also another area that you can consolidate quickly. Sure. These types of spend, mobile phones is another one. These areas of spend are typically where you can get quick wins, and then having the analytics. I mean, I use a piece of software that was developed by a Swedish management consultancy that they spun off then as a separate business. There are others out there on the market, but I use software to be able to then upload a CSV file from accounts payable, and to then give a dashboard and show companies some analytics of where they're spending the money, and where they have maybe more than one supplier for one area of spend, or where they have risk, and then to present the blueprint and say, okay, this is where I think you have opportunity, read a discussion document to then provoke a response to say, okay, well, no, this vendor is a sacred cow because they're cheaper, better, faster than the competition. Or actually, yeah, we've got 5 suppliers there, but we've never really looked at that, and we could consolidate that into one. A 2.5% cost saving across all of your spend, depending on the profit margin of a company, can often have the same effect on the P&L as a 10% increase in sales. Oh. Now, the only difference is what you spend is completely under your control as a company, but being able to increase your sales is entirely dependent on third parties, you know, in terms of whether you're able to acquire that business. So, you know, investing in procurement really should be seen as an asset rather than an overhead. But in many businesses, it's seen as an administrative function, just like, you know, HR or IT is. And it doesn't look at the bigger picture that actually it drives the bottom line.
Yeah, of course. I suppose if you're always focusing on increasing what's coming in, and rather than cutting what's going out, everything coming in, if you increase that, you pay tax on that, but you don't saving money rather than spending. There's no tax costs. You know, it's money which you're not being penalized for sort of getting, if you know what I mean.
Well, I mean, I guess you are, in the sense that if you increase your margin, then you have to pay tax on the increased level of profit. But I guess, yeah, you're paying less VAT on goods if you're ultimately buying stuff at lower prices.
True. So is there sort of a minimum scale of business that you would deal with? Is this a problem that arises in a business at a certain point in its growth, or is it sort of
yeah, and that's a really good question. So there is a sweet spot, absolutely, because, you know, if I'm putting resources into a business, then if I need to do a diagnostic of what they're spending with whom, and then put a blueprint together and a roadmap, it's going to be a similar amount of work, whether a business is turning over 1 million euro or 50 million. Right. There also comes a threshold at the top where, you know, a business becomes that complex, or that the decision-making process is so slow and so corporate that they would typically go with the Deloittes or the Accentures of the world. So there is definitely a sweet spot, and there are sort of mid-range boutique procurement consultancies as well now that are sort of tackling the market a little bit higher than what I would go after, but wouldn't necessarily be the domain of the big four. So yeah, I mean, typically I would need a business to be turning over 20-25 million dollars or euros before it would really be interesting for me to get my teeth into. If I'm going to be charging 40-50K for a sort of 5 or 6 month assignment to go in and deliver a project, yeah, I'd be looking to save the client 5 times that to be able to make it pay back and have the CFO's eyes light up when he's looking at, or she is looking at, investment versus return. So to be able to deliver that within a reasonable time frame, the sweet spot is sort of 20-25 million and upwards, to, depending on how homogenous the business is, up to about 100 million. But then depending on the complexity of the spend, you know, I don't have experience of buying IT and real estate and the types of things that services businesses would typically buy. So it really depends on the sector of the business too.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to ask you that, if there's any particular sectors that you focus on.
Yeah, I focus on manufacturing simply because that's what I know. But if I'm just doing the initial diagnostic and putting a report together of what they're spending their money on and with whom and where the opportunity is, it doesn't matter what the business is, because as long as they can give me data from the invoices that they've paid, I can run that diagnostic. If we found, though, that the majority of the potential was on things like real estate or IT or marketing, areas that traditionally I've not done much work on in the past because I've always worked in manufacturing businesses, then I would probably hand that over to them and say, here's what I've done and my recommendations, but I suggest you go and find an expert in those fields to be able to deliver it for you.
Sure. And is this something that companies will review on a regular basis, or is it more of a, let's get you in one time and then you solve the problem and, you know, they're left with an ongoing solution, or do they sort of fall by the wayside and create a mess again in your absence and you have to come back and fix it?
I've not gone back to any previous clients up until now, but it really depends on the philosophy of the CFO and how the company is run. If they see a good procurement function as an investment and as something that will yield them results as time goes on, I think it's something that if they get a consultant in that highlights opportunities and delivers value, that's often the catalyst for them to invest more in their own internal resources. So usually when they realize that they've got massive potential, they would then make the decision to staff it in-house, which I think is probably the right decision. Because, you know, if you're keeping a consultant on retainer over a certain amount of time, it can get expensive. And if there is that much work to justify keeping a consultant on over a significant period of time, then, you know, you have to ask the question, well, why not hire permanent staff?
Yeah, of course.
Yes, maybe keep the consultants on to train them and to coach them for a while, but yeah, it's having someone like me permanently on the books can get pretty expensive versus what you could pay someone as a permanent employee.
Yeah, no, that's fair. What are your plans for the business in terms of growth? You know, how do you grow a business like that? Do you take on more consultants? What does that process look like?
Yeah, that's the traditional way, and that, when I speak to most of my peers, or I don't really like calling them competitors, because I think a rising tide lifts all ships, even though that's a bit of a cliche.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of one person consultants ultimately want to grow and bring on associates, and perhaps bring on a salesperson to generate more business. I don't really over time want to necessarily sell my time for money. I see the consulting work that I do as a good way to pay my bills, but I would like to spin off different areas of the business. I would like to work more on advising companies what procurement technology to implement, and through being able to offer that as a free model, because I earn a commission off the software company if they ultimately buy it. I think that's a very smart way of doing business. It's similar to the way mortgage and insurance brokers work effectively. And it allows me to be agnostic on the advice as well, if I'm representing multiple different software companies rather than one. So that's the road that I'd like to go down more of in future. But I'm also interested to explore, maybe I did a talk last week at a conference for digital nomads and location independent workers. Cool. Just teaching basic negotiation skills that I'd learned from 18 years as a procurement pro. And it was eye-opening, really. And what was for me a very, very basic 25-minute presentation, it was just stuff that a lot of them had never come across before, because when you're an expert in your field, you don't often think just taking it back to basics can be so valuable for people that don't have a background in that area. So perhaps building that out into some sort of group coaching session, again, could be a nice revenue stream. And doing what I'm doing with the podcast on procurement tech, again, through sponsorships or through spin-offs, or maybe through doing some digital content in the shape of in the shape of an ebook or some sort of directory off the back of that, would be interesting too.
Yeah. No, I think that there's definitely in that negotiation, it's sort of negotiation training basically is what you'd be doing in that online course or whatever. That's massively popular at the moment.
Yeah, or even teaching basic commercial skills to SMEs that maybe don't have the resources to hire a procurement team, or that maybe have a more sort of administrative procurement team that do back office stuff and deal with the deliveries and the invoicing and the ordering. So as department heads are a little bit more commercially savvy. I certainly think, especially in Southeast Europe, where there isn't that commercial savviness in businesses, sure, other than sort of foreign direct investment businesses. I do think that would be a useful training, speaking to local procurement pros here and people that know the local market very well.
Yeah, cool, fantastic. And do you ever miss the UK? Is that ever something when you look back on? No.
No, I mean, I joke about it, but I miss a good curry. I miss the pub. Yeah. I miss some of the humor and the workplace banter that you have in the UK. But yeah, when I go home, it doesn't feel like home anymore. Certain things do. I like being able to buy certain food in the supermarket without worrying about having to pay inflated prices in an expat shop to get it. But yeah, true. No, I don't really miss it. Whenever I go back, it feels familiar, but it doesn't feel like home.
What do you think's changed about it compared to when you were last there?
I don't necessarily think anything has changed. It certainly looks a lot more crowded and a lot more run down than it used to when I was a teenager. In terms of the infrastructure and in terms of the way that towns and city centres look. But yeah, I was always keen to live abroad back from when I was a student, and I always found the weather quite depressing. So I think that I don't think I could ever live there on a permanent basis.
No, that's fair enough. Just quick fire, if you could give one piece of advice to somebody who wanted to leave the UK, what would that be?
Someone to leave the UK, do it. I'd say do it. It's a very enriching experience, but it's obviously a lot more difficult now with Brexit. But even though a lot of there was a lot of negativity surrounding Brexit, saying, oh, it's going to be impossible now to go and live and work abroad. Well, It's not really. It's just more difficult to go to Europe. But
Yeah,
you know, there's, you're in Dubai. You know, if you're skilled in something where there's a worker shortage, it's pretty easy to get into Australia, Canada, New Zealand. There are lots of more off the beaten track places that if you can show that you've got enough money in the bank or a regular income, you can get permanent residency. You know, places like in Southeast Asia or Latin America offer that. So yeah, yes, it's more difficult, and it's certainly harder if you want to go and work in continental Europe. But the world's a much bigger place than that, and it's probably easier than you think, especially if you've got some savings or if you've got some skills that make it pretty easy to get hired.
Sure. And the same question again, but for someone trying to start their own business or go self-employed, top tip. have a runway if you want.
Yeah, no, have a runway. Yeah, it took me a lot longer to make enough money to live off than I ever thought it would. And obviously part of that was just bad luck and bad timing with COVID. But if you're not dependent on a particular location and you're not stuck somewhere because of family or any other commitments, then really have a look into the two biggest things that most people spend their money on are income tax and rent or mortgage. So if you can lower both of those, then yeah, I would recommend looking into that.
Yeah, fair enough. You touched there on COVID impacting your business. So just quickly on that, obviously when that was happening, there was a lot of talk about supply chain issues, and obviously businesses, I would have thought, would be pretty keen to reduce their expenditure or at least revisit where their money's going, so they have a sort of business runway, if you like. So did that in any way benefit your business, or were most companies looking at it as your part of the expenditure that they wanted to reduce? How did that sort of work?
Yeah, the latter.
Seems quite short-sighted of them.
Yeah, large companies are not particularly commercially literate. They don't look to the long term, for good reasons in many cases. If they have to report out quarterly to the stock market, especially, you know, US domicile companies have to do that. It's the easiest thing in the world to slash budgets.
Yeah,
but I would say that it's a very commercially illiterate decision to slash money on things like marketing, training, travel, and procurement as well.
Yeah.
Yes, maybe you need to slash budgets on sales in a recession because there isn't much new business to go after. But
sure.
But slashing money on the other stuff, it upsets your employees and demotivates them. Yeah. And at the end of it, all of the A players leave because they see a company as being penny punching and not innovative.
Yeah,
I didn't see Apple or Amazon slashing budgets during COVID. No, you know, this is what, and it's easy to say that because they were growing, but they were growing for a reason, because they're innovative and they'd outsmarted their competitors in times gone by. And I think it's a very short-sighted decision to cut budgets. It's a lot smarter to look into your expenses holistically with a professional and look at, okay, where can we save money that is excess to what we need? You know, where are we paying over the odds? Where do we have more suppliers than we need? You know, where are our service contracts over specified, where we can just cut stuff without damaging our business? But sure, just to do a blanket 10% budget cut across discretionary expenditure is a rather stupid decision, and it makes me shake my head that either CFOs don't have the backbone to challenge it, which I think is true in a lot of cases if they have big mortgages and kids to pay through college and don't want to upset the status quo. But I think it's a very short-sighted and not astute way of working.
No, totally agree, especially on the marketing front as well. You know, I think that's normally the first thing to go, isn't it? And
training,
and training, exactly. So but both of those things are things that you don't necessarily see a result from immediately. So you know, I think it's quite hard to display value quickly in those areas of a business. So often it's the case, especially for young businesses. You'll see they'll if they start struggling earlier than they thought, they'll get rid of those things because they haven't had the opportunity to display the value they were bringing. So I think we saw quite a lot of that over that period.
Yeah.
But yeah, so outlook is looking positive from here on out. COVID sort of, do you think companies are sort of looking at these things again and willing to put the budgets back on?
Yeah, I'm seeing two things that are happening. I mean, there's certainly companies now have money to spend because essentially everything was frozen last year. So if they did have budgets that rolled over, or if businesses up this year after they had a tough time last year, I think we're going to see a lot of supply chain instability, and we're going to see more black swan events in terms of not necessarily a pandemic, but in terms of geopolitical instability, cybersecurity, that kind of thing. I think that will be the new normal. But yeah, certainly I see that procurement and supply chain is going to be a lot more on the radar of the C-suite going forward. I think the big question for people like me is, will this continue to be a big market for consultants that have expertise in a specific area, or that can go in and hit the ground running and deliver a project? Or will companies go more down the road of stocking their permanent staff and enlarging their procurement teams? I think it will be a mixture of both, but I think the one thing that we'll definitely see more of going forward is that there will be big investments in procurement IT infrastructure. I think sales and HR have had a lot of investment over the past years when you look at how big companies like Salesforce and Workday have become. And I think now that it's procurement's time to shine there, because I think what a lot of companies have realized is that if you put garbage in, then you get garbage out. And companies have got good sales data, but they've had pretty crappy procurement data in times gone by. And that has often hampered them in being able to look at and deal with and evaluate what the risks are out there in their supply base.
Sure. Fantastic. Interesting. I didn't really know much about your industry. So it's always interesting to hear something new. I feel like I understand, like a lot of things a bit better now, especially even in the business that I work in as well. I've seen some of those things you mentioned about how we buy stuff. And I can think about things that we do in terms of when we buy computers and stuff for employees, and what that process looks like. And it's actually quite funny thinking about it now, what that process is. Pretty sure it's just an administrator somewhere who gets dumped with the task. So yeah, it makes sense. Maybe we should get you into this business at some point.
Yeah, hook me up to your CFO. I'll have a look.
Yeah, I'll see what I can do. Cool. Well, look, I appreciate you coming on. If there's anyone obviously who's listening to this who wants to get in touch with you or speak to you, what's the best place for them to find you?
The place that I'm most active is LinkedIn. So, okay. I mean, I am on Twitter. I do have a website as well, but the most active place is LinkedIn. My last name is spelled Meads. So yeah, just connect with me on LinkedIn and just drop me a quick intro message when you connect, just so as I know where you're connecting with me from, just so as I know it's not spam, and would be happy to talk procurement with anyone who wants to.
Awesome. We'll put links to everything as well, everywhere that we share this. So hopefully some people come through that and get in touch with you.
Fantastic.